We should be live.
Yeah, it's good. Clarence. Senator Lamb. Senator Lamb was supposed to start the meeting, so I apologize. I don't know what happened to him. I assume he's trying to get back on. So if you just give him a minute, there he is. Senator Lamb, can you hear us?
Probably not.
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm having some audio difficulties, so I'm signed on twice to try to get around that. Do we have everyone? Do we have a quorum?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we can go ahead and get started. Is it live streaming already? It is. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the delegation work session for February 1st. Thank everyone for joining this morning. We have circulated an agenda for this morning's work session, and we have a few bills that are new and thus up for discussion. The first bill is Howard County 14-23, which is Public Campaign Financing Board of Education. So this bill was introduced as a companion to the bill 10-23 that most of you are familiar with. This bill, I think, has been posted to the website. If it's not, it should be updated later today. It's been shared with the county folks who administer the website, so it should be updated soon if it's not already. We also circulated a one-page explanation of the bill to the members, which we will walk through in a second as well. I want to preface this with a few thoughts. One, because of Howard County 10-23, we had reached out and heard a lot of feedback from members of the community, and we wanted to be responsive. One of the main suggestions that we had heard from folks from the community is to really help support our Board of Ed candidates who would be running for office, and this was really an effort to be responsive to that, pulling together recommendations to have public financing available for our Board of Ed candidates. As many of you know, current Board of Ed candidates running are not eligible to be supported by the public financing system here in the county. And that's the case across all counties that have public financing, because state law did not extend public financing to make those funds available for county Board of Ed candidates. And so this is a local bill just to do so for Howard County's public financing system to be extended to local Board of Ed candidates. I also want to thank Dara, who moved mountains to be able to kind of make some updates that we had asked for to make this happen. I know the folks in drafting are really, really busy, especially at this time of the session, because there are a lot of requests that are coming through, and Dara really was able to kind of pull together some updates to this bill that you're all seeing now. So I want to thank him for his efforts over the last few days too. Well, I think what would be helpful is if we start with kind of the one pager that's been circulated to your offices, and I am happy to share my screen as well, if that's helpful, so that folks can see this. Let me see if we have screen saving disabled. So If you
Thank you.
don't already have them, yeah, go ahead. Was someone going to say something?
I think you should be
Okay.
able to share your screen now. Sorry about that.
Oh, all right. Sounds good. Oh, there we go. All right. So this is the one pager that was shared with your offices. You should have this by email as well. We're going to just kind of walk through this briefly to explain. The bill is very straightforward. It's basically similar to other bills that expand public financing or permit public financing at the local level. This bill is enabling to the county council to give them the authority to expand public financing to the Board of Ed candidates. But the funding for the local public financing system actually comes from the county. And so one thing that we're trying to address as part of this bill is to make sure that we don't impact the county's public financing system too greatly all at once. And so what we came up with was an effort to really help stagger and phase in public financing availability for these Board of Ed candidates so it doesn't overwhelm the existing county's public financing system, because the funds actually have to be put in by the county to allow this to occur. And so this is completely enabling to the county council to implement, but if they were to implement this, it would be phased in this fashion. So in the 2024 election cycle, which is the one coming up, there will be no public financing available. This is to give the time to the county council to approve of this and also to start putting money into the public financing system from the county budget to be able to support this. However, in order to phase this in, it begins staggering the terms of the Board of Ed candidate positions. So Council District 1 and Council District 2 in the next election cycle would have a full 4-year term. 3, 4, and 5 would have 2-year terms. And then in the next election cycle in 2026, this would be the first election cycle where public financing would be available. It would be available for 2 candidates. It would be available for the 2 at-large seats. And so the top vote getter of the 2 at-large seats would get a full 4-year term. The second vote getter would get a 2-year term. Again, this is to help begin staggering this later on. In the subsequent election cycle in 2028, this would be the second election cycle which public financing would be available. It would be made available for 3 candidates. One of the at-large seats, the one who had a 2-year term from 2026, and then 2 of the councilmanic district seats for 4-year terms, full 4-year terms. So they would be made available for 3 candidates. And then the next election cycle, this will be the third election cycle, will be available for 4 candidates. And those 4 candidates would be the 1 at-large seat, and then council district seats 3, 4, and 5. And then subsequent elections after that, it would be made available for all of the Board of Ed candidates. And just to note and recall that there can be more than 1 Board of Ed candidate running for each of those positions that would qualify or be eligible for public financing. So remember that while it's opening up for these 2 positions, it actually should be public financing for 2 positions, not 2 candidates. There could be multiple candidates running for each of those positions, right? So they would all be tapping into the public financing funds. And this is the reason that we wanted to phase this in so we wouldn't impact the public financing system and its budget all at once. No board members' terms that are currently elected would be cut short. I think we want to make that clear too. This is only prospective. So anyone that's currently a elected board member would be able to serve out their full term. This is only for upcoming elections. So this is, there's a lot of language in the draft, and I think you have copies of the draft too. If they're, they should be in your inboxes. there's a lot of language in there to basically make this happen, but the gist of what's going on in there is really to kind of phase this in via this schedule that you're seeing on this page. So that's the summary of the bill. Otherwise, pretty straightforward. Let me see if we can open up to questions, and before that, see if Chair Watson has anything else to add on this. Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. So I just want to summarize or clarify maybe for people that might be listening. First of all, in all of the conversations that we had on Council Bill 10, one of the things we heard that would be helpful would be public financing for Board of Education in order to reduce the barriers to serve, which was one of our goals in Council Bill 10. Second thing is that we cannot mandate that the county do public financing, but we can enable them to do it by allowing it within the law. And third, we don't want to overwhelm the campaign finance system at the county with 7, Board of Education races all at once or even within a couple of years. So the idea is to phase this in, and we're doing so in a way that does not cut anybody's term short. It allows everyone to serve the term that they run for, but it phases it in over this period of time between 2026 and 2030. Is that all correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks for bringing all that together. Anything else to add?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, I think I saw Delegate Hills first, hand first, and then Delegate Ziegler.
Thank you.
Well, before that, Mr. Moriarty, you have something to add from council's end?
Yes, I was just going to say, this is in the bill, but I'm just going to clarify while we have this image on the screen, just to make sure there's no kind of uncertainty that in 2026, there are also elections for District 3, District 4, and District 5. The reason they're not included is because there would be no public financing for those elections. I may be over-explaining. I just want to make it clear to everybody watching that although those elections are not listed on the screen right now, that's because there would not be public financing available, not because there wouldn't be those elections taking place in that year.
Right, good point. Yes, thanks for clarifying that. Delegate Hill, I apologize. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Sure, no, that's fine, Mr. Chair, and that actually was helpful. And I did look at the bill, but and looked at the sheet, and this was confusing to me. Are we adjusting the terms to roll this in? In other words, right now, the folks who will be running in 2024 would all have 4-year terms. Is that correct?
No, the folks running in 2024
currently before this legislation.
Yeah, that
right.
We've all, because we phased in the terms in the last 6 to 8 years in order to create staggered terms. So I guess my problem is I'm not understanding why we would go back to staggering terms in order to offer a phased in public financing rather than just say something like, 20% of the optimal amount will be available in 2024 for X number, because not everyone's going to take it anyway. And that it will be preferentially given to these, but I don't understand why we have to change their terms in order to determine who's going to be eligible for public financing.
it's a temporary change in term in order to stagger the total amount of seats over.
I understand that it's temporary. I don't understand why it's necessary at all. You can phase in public financing without changing the terms.
We could have, because we could have 5 Board of Ed races in 1 year that have multiple candidates that all choose public financing. So
Correct.
rather than risk that kind of hit on the taxpayers, we would suggest and allow the county to split those 5 seats up between 2 years.
But you could also, alternatively, you could say that in the first year, there would only be public financing available in CD 2 and 3, unless there are no one taking it. If there's extra money, it will be available in 4 or 5. In other words, you don't have to change the year to say we're not going to make it available to everybody.
I think that's inequitable. I think it's inequitable to say some candidates in the year can have it and some can't.
And you can also say, based on when they file, that if they file by a certain date, they're eligible, and when the money runs out, they're eligible.
I still think that's inequitable. I think if we're going to do it, we need to provide public financing to everyone, the option to everyone in that race in that year.
Well, all right, just for the record, I have a problem with going back to I like staggered terms. I like the public financing. I don't like this approach of having to have candidates run for just 2 terms in order to phase this in, because I think there are alternative ways to do it. Thank you.
It also balances it permanently, right? So right now it's 2 versus 2 in one election cycle and 5 in another election cycle. This would help balance it permanently moving forward, where it would be 3 in an election cycle and 4 in another election cycle. Helps reduce the turnover too. I think it was Delegate Ziegler next, and then Delegate Wu, and then Delegate Terrazas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if I understand this. If you elected not to take the public financing, or you didn't qualify for it, would you be running for a 4-year term, and the person and the candidate who did elect to take it would be running for a 2-year term?
No,
Okay.
the terms are spelled out here. This is just when the public financing would be made available to those folks, but the terms would be staggered in the way that is displayed here to phase it in.
Okay, regardless of whether you take it or not,
Right,
choose it or not. Okay, thank you.
sure. Delegate Wu? If you're
Thank you,
speaking up, go
Chair.
ahead.
Chair Lam. So I think if we compare the election right now, right, we have 2 countywide board positions. We have 5 by district. In terms of the scale running rate, I think that we should be able to differentiate. For example, if we think about the cost, and one in like a countywide election probably spend as much time 5 together, right? Because it's the scale of the election. So I think try to differentiate between 2 countywide and 4 by district. I think that makes sense. At the same time, if we concern the money, I think we need to set a little threshold in terms of small donation match, right? So for any candidate, if by district or by countywide, there should be a big difference there, because anybody probably can easily get probably 100 small donation if the countywide election. But if you raise the bar a little bit to say, at least the candidate has some countywide support from small donors, I think that will help us to reduce some candidate who may only get 100 or 200 or 50 small donations, right? I think the county will need to figure out what exact threshold there in terms of how much money they can support. I would like that approach instead like this. This one I would say it's very confusing to me. Even when I first read it, I just couldn't understand. But thanks for explaining that.
So the matching requirements are all set by the county, and so those have in state law all been deferred to the county. So all counties decide their own matching eligibility and requirements. We're doing it this way because we have no assurance how the county council will decide how to modify or set up this program for Board of Ed candidates. And so, you know, this is an effort to try to put some guardrails on that. They can set those eligibility requirements as you described. That's up to the county council and the county's decision. But this at least phases it in with these guardrails in place. The state has never determined those matching requirements in state statute.
I see, Chair Lam, I think one reason we talk about this because we are afraid the county will not be able to finance it, right? So that's the reason we try to stage around, right? So I think if we said we defer that to the county, I think instead make it very complicated. We make the rule much simpler and then let the county decide how they will be able to do it. Probably that will be easier for the public to understand as well.
Okay, anything else to add? Not, Delegate Terrazas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank you and Delegate Watson for doing this bill. I think citizen election funds for Board of Ed candidates is a great idea. It builds on the citizen election fund that we set up when I was on the council. It's my bill, and I appreciated the support. I think it's a great idea. I am a little concerned about the, and I also think I think Delegate Feldmark was working on a statewide bill to do the same, which I also support, but I think it makes sense to have both. I do think it's confusing to change when and how.
We just to be clear, we had statewide bills prior, and they were all shot down. But in prior
Well, that's
sessions,
why,
we did.
well, and that's why I think it's
Bad.
important that you're doing this also. So I really appreciate you're doing it, because we never know what's going to happen on those, and it's good for us to be able to vote on it here. But I do think, for me, I'm a little concerned that our residents will be confused by not having all of the district-wide elections in one year and all of the countywide in another year. I think I'm concerned that that will lead to more confusion among the voters, and when we're trying to get more people to be involved and so that's just my 2 cents. And then I also, if you haven't, I'm sure you probably have, but if you haven't, I think it would be a good idea to discuss with the Citizen Election Fund Board at the county level, because they are the experts in this at this point. But again, thank you for doing this. I think the bill is a good idea.
Okay. Any other? Go ahead,
Senator,
Delegate Watson.
Senator Lamb, this will be on the public hearing for February. Abby, what's the date, please?
7th.
February 7th.
Yeah.
Right. So we're not expecting anyone to, vote on it or take a position on it immediately. We'd like to make sure the public has an opportunity to respond, and then we will address it after the public hearing. I just want to respond to the concern that the change is something that will be confusing to the public. I think anytime we change the way we hold elections, it can be confusing, but I think that once this change goes through, it will be understood by the public, and particularly by the people who vote for and follow Board of Education elections, because we know there's a tremendous undervote in that area. And it will enable people to, I think, to focus on their district election and the fact that they have an at-large position to vote for as well. So in any given year, they could have one district and one at-large to vote for. I think that we don't want to underestimate the public's ability to understand this, though, and we need to look at the plus sides of it, which are that it will reduce the barriers to serve, and it will do so in a way that allows the financing to be spread out. So we're being a little bit due diligent about the amount of money that the taxpayers will be spending on this. So I think we need to keep an open mind about the pluses of this versus the possible negative of it being too complicated. Because I do think our voters are intelligent and they can internalize this and understand it. And if this allows us to implement a robust public financing for Board of Education, which I think it will in a financially responsible way, it may be worth helping the public to sort of make the transition.
And previously, over the last couple election cycles, we did go through a staggered transition with abbreviated terms too to get to where we are now. So the public has gone through this kind of a process before. I know Delegate Feldmark, you had your hand up and you took it down. Are you okay?
I just wanted to confirm that this would be a topic for the public hearing next week before we
Okay.
act on it. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. I next saw Delegate Hill, if we can take you at the end, since you had the first bite, Senator Hester, then Delegate Guzani.
Thank you, Chair Lamb. I'm still trying to understand. So are the current Board of Ed seats, they currently run every 4 years. So if they just ran in 2022, wouldn't they be up again in 2026?
Those were the at-large seats. So right now we have a system where the 2 at-large seats were the ones that we just elected in 2022. Those will be up in 2026. The council-based seats were last elected in 2020.
Okay.
And so therefore your term ends on 2024. So we have right now a distribution where it's 5 seats in one election cycle and 2 in another.
That's helpful. I do think it's slightly, I mean, having run a race myself, you know, I think it feels like a lot of work to shorten the terms you got to run again in 2 years. I don't know. It's for what it's worth. I think that the people who are only going to be serving 2 years are not going to like it.
Well, they might like it because they might say, oh, I want to try this for 2 years and then I can run if I want or run if I don't want. The idea is it reduces barriers, you know, but.
No, I fully support the idea of the public financing. I think I'm kind of in Delegate Hill's camp though, where there's got to be another way to do it financially to spread out the cost without changing the terms. I don't know what that is yet, but I think it won't.
And as I was mentioning earlier, a couple election cycles ago, we did go through this phase-in period to get to the at-large seats and the current councilmanic-based seats as well, where there were folks that had 2-year terms, knowing that it was a shorter term and they still ran. Senator Esther, anything else to add? Oh, okay. Delegate Guzman.
Thank you. So I just wanted to make sure that I read the chart right in that for council districts 3, 4, and 5, their first opportunity to do the citizen financing would be in 2030.
That is correct. Yes,
That's correct.
They'll get phased in 2030.
Okay, it just seems a little bit of a long way off. Which it's not that I don't understand the financial part on the county. I understand that. I would want to be curious about whether or not we might be able to shift it so that the 2-year terms are for only 3 councilmanic districts in 2024, which doesn't help necessarily a whole lot, but gets people into the system a little bit sooner. And I don't know financially if that would work better. So, and I don't know which districts you'd want to choose, but instead of 1 and 2 having the 4-year term, you could do 1, 2, and 3 as an example.
I mean, I think we open to that. I think you know, we only chose 1 and 2 to help with the staggering, but we could do 1, 2, and 3 to move it sooner.
Thank you.
But ultimately, that would still get to a more balanced place of an election cycle where you have 4 seats that are up, and another election cycle where you have 3 rather than the 5 and 2 that we have now.
Yes, and I think that I actually like that idea, the 4 and 3.
Okay. Delegate Hill, and then Delegate Terrazza and Feldmar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess what I want to say is I think that you've had a lot of suggestions just on first pass from the delegation members of ways to achieve the goal of phasing in public financing. And apparently there's a secondary goal that you've mentioned, Chairman Lamb, of shifting our staggered from an unbalanced 5-2 to a more balanced 4-3. And I'm not clear if that's a secondary goal or a second primary goal. But I guess the point I want to make, Chairman Watson had suggested that raising questions about whether or not there are better ways to achieve these two goals is somehow being in opposition to public financing or in opposition to phasing in so that the cost is not overwhelming. And I think that's just not true. I don't think anyone here is in opposition to public financing or to phasing it in. I think that the county council, as Delegate Wu said, would also want to phase it in and would have the ability to come up with a system that would allow them in any number of ways, including capping what's available and so forth. So I would like as, I'm just trying to keep clear which of the things we're trying to address as primary. Even the folks who ran the last time for 4-year terms, if they're running for re-election, would now be told, actually, you thought once you were in at 4 years, now we're telling you, you're now going to have to run for a 2-year term. And yes, we've done that before. But again, I think we need to keep clear on what the goals are. And if that is a goal to shorten some terms in and of itself, then that's worth a discussion and debate. But I just wanted for the record to be clear that I'm not in opposition. And I don't think anyone here is in opposition to public financing. There are lots of ways to phase it in. And as Delegate Wu pointed out, the cost is a function of how large the race is. So councilmatic races are less expensive than countywide races. And it's a function that year of how many people are running. Thank you.
I think it's important to bear in mind too, that this is not just about saving money in the phase-in. This will help balance the costs permanently across the board to have it as a 4-3 type of election distribution rather than a 5-2. So, it's important to kind of bear that in mind. And we can't balance it permanently like that without going through the staggering. So, that's the reason that we're having to go through the staggering as well with the 2-year term to do that. There's no other way to get to a staggering without going through a 2-year term.
And again, Mr. Chair, if you recall, the last time we phased in through staggering, we stacked because everyone was running the same year. The top vote getter was given 4-year terms and further on down. In this case, we're randomly taking some districts and saying, you're running for a 2-year term. So the last time it was the 4-year terms went to the highest
Right.
vote getters. So this is another way of doing it, but it's it's more random than it has to be, more capricious than it has to be. Thank you.
The last time we did it, we did do it where the top vote getter gets a 4-year term and the lower vote getter gets the 2-year term. And we're doing that too with the staggering of the at-larges. But the councilmanic districts, we can't break it down that way, right? Because there's no way it's a different kind of a race there. So in order to stagger the council-based seats, it has to be broken up somewhere. Doug Ziegler someone was mentioning that, you could break it up councilmanic districts 1 and 2 or 1, 2, and 3, we're open to that. But in order to have staggering, or in order to have a more even distribution, the only way is to stagger, and somehow you have to break up the councilmanic bunch. Delegate Terraza?
Thank you. I believe Delegate Feldmark was first.
Okay, Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I want to just encourage us to think about if we're going this route, to really think about all of the options, because I don't think a 2-year term is the only way we can achieve staggered terms. We could also achieve staggered terms with a 6-year term, right? And so I think, what you've laid out here as a proposal, and I understand and appreciate all the reasons that went into it. And I think the result here is that for 3 of the districts, right, in this example, it's councilmanic districts 3, 4, and 5, we're asking folks to run for a shortened term which we've never done before. We've never asked someone to run for a 2-year term for Board of Ed. It was the result of running for a 4-year term and finishing lower in the ranking, right? But we've never really asked someone to make that decision to go through the process of running for the seat to hold it for only 2 years. So, and then for these 3 districts that only get a 2-year term, in 2026, they have to run again and they still don't have access to public financing. Because in 2026, you're only offering public financing to the at-large seats, right? So if we need to do a staggering and the benefit of the staggering is access to public financing, I guess another option to consider would be 6-year terms. So then the next time you have to run, so you're not adding an extra campaign without access to public financing, right? And I'm not positive I support that, right? But I think it's important that we're looking at all of the options and what makes sense, because I think, one of the things that we've heard through the discussion of all of the bills related to the Board of Ed is that it's a really hard job that's undervalued, right? We don't pay enough, running is hard. So adding an extra election as we're trying to wait to get to the solution might not be the best way to go. So I just want to put that out there for consideration.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Terrazza, followed by Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate Delegate Feldmark's comments. I agree there are other ways to do this. And I guess I'm wondering if the issue is trying to even out how many of the Board of Ed are getting elected at one time or another. I understand there's a couple ways to get there. But if the issue is how long does it take to phase in, isn't that something we could sort of give a deadline to the county on when they can afford it? I mean, maybe the deadline is that 2030 or 2028. I forget what I misplaced the paper just a minute ago. But just letting them decide when they can afford to do this in full. Just a thought. Since this is enabling legislation anyway, but thank you.
Can I just respond to that, Senator
Yeah,
Lamb?
go ahead. Go ahead, Delegate Watson.
I guess we're, after talking with sort of some of the county people, we're kind of afraid that if we don't offer them a plan where they can spread it out or allow them to spread it out, they're really not going to get there in terms of financing the full board the way that it is now. So the idea was to make it as easy as possible for the finances of. In fact, one of the things that was said to me in some of the discussions was, is the state going to provide funding for this? It's a state position. So.
Aw, Pam looks so cute today.
So I think there is some concern on the part of the county. Can they afford to do this? And so we're trying to make it as palatable as possible to spread it out. And I think leaving it fully in their hands, it may not happen, is sort of the conclusion that we came to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Delegate Watson. Delegate Wu.
Chair Lam, I have a question and a comment. A question: why we're selecting District 4 and the District 5 for 2 years? Why not other districts? What's the rationale behind that?
District 4 and District 5. Can you repeat, clarify that question?
So I saw there like a District 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but only District 4 and District 5 for 2-year term. And why we're focused on like 4 or 5 first, and what's the rationale behind that?
It's actually District 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, 3, 4, 5, right? Yeah. Why?
I don't think there's a brilliant rationale for that. It's just that we needed to, in order to more evenly distribute the council-based seats, it need to be split somewhere. So, and it need to be split somehow with either 4-year terms or 2-year terms. So you could
Yes.
theoretically do, I think, like I said, this was suggested by one of the other delegates earlier, have it broken down so it's council districts 1, 2, and 3 in one grouping and 4 and 5 in another, with the at-larges, respectively with those two groups as well. Or you could, we have it listed as 1 and 2 with 4-year terms, and 3, 4, and 5 with initial 2-year terms, and then reverting back to 4-year terms. Or you could reverse it. You could have council districts 1 and 2 with 2-year terms, 3, 4, and 5 with 4-year terms. It's just variations on the same kind of theme. I don't think there was a rationale why it was, it had to be districts 1 and 2 with 4-year terms initially, and 3, 4, and 5 with 2-year terms, except that that's just kind of the sequence that it's numbered.
I see. Thank you. I have a comment about the staggering side, right? So I think the reason we talk about staggering because we want to provide stability on the board. I remember during the last probably 10 years, except we elect the school board by district, they in general don't have a huge turnover, right? In general, you have a majority board stay on the board, right? Even you have 3 or 4, like elect 3 or elect 4, but in general, you have a majority of them stay on the board. You don't have like 5 board members left the board at the same time. It only happens probably once during the by district election, right? I think we shouldn't worry too much about in terms of stability of the board. If the board, the whole board is doing well, I think the voter will not re-elect them, right? I think, and at the same time, if you are doing a reasonable job, they will be re-elected if they want to join the re-election. And in general, I don't see a big problem in terms of that staggering issue. Thank you.
Okay. I think the staggering was only really part of the issue. I think we also wanted to be able to spread the cost around more evenly.
That's
so
the primary.
that also helps with the,
Primary reason is to phase in the financial impact on the county. That's the primary reason. So saying that, I think we're definitely open to other ideas to get to the same place. And I think Delegate Feldmark mentioned something interesting, and there may be other ways to get there. And Delegate Hill too. I think the comment that I made to Delegate Hill was that if we leave the positions the way they are now, but we only provide public financing for a portion of them at a time or phase that in that way, it is inequitable to candidates running. So that was my comment about trying to implement it in a phased way without changing the positions. If you only offer it to 1 or 2 races or certain people that sign up first, I just don't think that's equitable over the long run.
See 2 hands from Delegate Hill and Delegate Feldmark. Why don't we take these 2 and then we'll wrap up this.
Okay.
Delegate
Ziegler as well, and then we'll
Thank
wrap
you.
up this conference.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, again, I was, just responding and my point was that there are other ways of doing it and other suggestions have been made. So inequitability is a concern. But for instance, saying that the county could make a decision, and I think I recognize that sometimes we have to be very prescriptive in helping to support the county to do things that have financial impact, and sometimes less so. I think this may be overly prescriptive. But for instance, that was a for instance that it's, the money runs out of the first come, first serves or whatever. But there are other options, like for instance, in the first year, there's a 10% match, and then it's phased in at a 25% at match, and then it's phased in at another % match. So there are lots of ways to do it. And I think, when we can look at it and there's no way to predict the future, but the reality is that when public financing becomes available, we don't see a clamoring of candidates to take it. Now, it might be different in a school board race. And I think we do have to be prepared for what if everyone wants it. But my point is that there are other ways besides this to do it. And I echo other members who said, let's take this good idea of a bill and be much more thoughtful about what the options are.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to laugh at that. I was just thinking that we put so much thought into this. There are other ways to do it, but.
Well, but this is our first discussion. So you've put thought into it.
You can be more thoughtful about it. Yes.
You've put thought into it, and some of us are looking at it for the first time, or in this past few days for the first time. And again, I assume, Delegate Terrasa had suggested that you talk with the folks who actually run the system, and maybe you already have. I haven't heard from them and what they've come up with, but so it's not being disrespectful of your effort. But I think that we're all here with good intentions and just recognizing that there are lots of ways to get this done that may be more equitable, less confusing, and fairer for the people who are taking the time to serve in these positions under really challenging times. And then you served on the board, and Delegate Wu has served on the board, so you guys know more than the rest of us about the challenges of running and serving. Thank you.
All right, Delegate Feldmar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, just sort of want to raise for consideration an idea that I'm not necessarily proposing, but think we should consider. And that is, I think I'm feeling somewhat uncomfortable with, and I think I'm hearing from others a little bit of discomfort around the sort of choosing of which districts get which length of term, right? And that feels a little uncomfortable, right? So one, when we had the at-large elections where we staggered terms based on election outcome, it was sort of a pretty clean way to do it because everyone was running in the same race. And so they were clearly ranked, right? So when people are running in 5 different districts, it's not as clean and clear how to do that. But we could, if we wanted to consider, do something like the 3 candidates who get the highest percentage of votes in their districts are the 3 who, get the 2-year, 6-year, whatever. So we could tie it to election outcome. So it's not, and it's not as clean and clear because they're not running in the same race, but at least it's tying it to election outcome rather than us just simply making a choice and saying these districts, yes, these districts, no, these districts 4 years, these districts 2 years, whatever, So I just wanted to put that out for consideration if folks want to think about it.
That's definitely, an option.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're open to suggestions, so that's helpful. Last comment from Delegate Zieber or question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Am I correct in assuming that there is no dedicated source of funding at the county level for public financing? And additionally, I know this is essentially impossible. It's art, not science, but have you tried to get a sense of what it might cost?
It's kind of hard to predict because we don't know how many candidates will run, right? So there's a variable there that's just impossible to kind of gauge. Toga Watson, do you want to respond? I think you're muted.
The county, the projections would come from the county in the county's commission and then to the county council, depending on how they wanted to implement the amounts, or the percentages. So we could go back though and sort of take a look at the county council and just get a feel for it. And maybe we can do that before our next meeting.
Okay. Anything else, Delegate Ziegler? No. Okay. All right. So thank you for the really robust discussion, some helpful suggestions. We'll keep this conversation going. We want to make sure we have time for these other bills too. We're going to move on now to Howard County 16-23 Board of Education elections ranked choice voting. This is Delegate Wu's bill. Do you want to speak to the bill? This is also a bill that has not had its public hearing, just like the preceding one. The public hearing will be the local public hearing that we have next week on February 7th. Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that if we talk about something confusing, this can be more confusing than previous one. So, and it never tried before. So ranked choice voting is something can be simple when you vote, right? Right now, we vote only choose the number of candidates who will win. But a ranked choice voting, where the voter will have the option to rank candidates in order of their preference, like first, second, third, or fourth, right? Voters that do not help voters' top choices, they won't count for the next choices. So the ranked choice voting can eliminate problems like a voter splitting. Sometimes we could spoiler a candidate who had no chance to win, but they try to just model the water, right? And then with ranked choice voting, I think voter can really rank candidate in order of preferences. And voters know sometimes if their first choice doesn't win, their vote automatically account for their next choice instead. In that case, it's really motivates them come out and vote. I think that probably will help us to increase our voting rate. This can free voters from worrying about how others will vote and which candidates are more or less likely to win. And I think like each vote is very precious and should count to full extent of possibility. And then ranked choice voters' options can help the election outcome that better represent voter preferences. Winners elected with the ranked choice voting have a broader support and truly represent their community. I think that's the intention for this bill. At the same time, the ranked choice voting can really discourage negative campaign. And because candidates, you compete not only for the first choice, but you're competing for the second choice votes from their opponent's supporter, right? Which lessens their intensity to run negative campaigns. And in the ranked choice voting system, candidates do best when they reach out to positively to as many voters as possible, including those who may not support their first but their second choice. I think that's why we're proposing here. And that's like comparing what we have right now, right? 2022, we have election by district. 2022, we have at large member. So this can be implemented in the next election cycle. And in terms of how this will be implemented, it's just there needs some change in terms of both ballot and the counting system. I think last time when we had a conversation with the State Board of Election in the Ways and Means Committee, and they said they have the capability to do that. That's all I have. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
All right, sorry, I think I was on mute. This is a bill for discussion. Any questions for the members? No questions?
I think that's the reason people feel confused, right? It's something totally new. So.
I do have one question. Has there been any jurisdiction in the state that set up ranked choice voting up to this point, or is this precedent?
Yes, there are some other states. If, for example, recently there's a senator election in Alaska, right? I think a lot of people
I
heard
meant
about.
in Maryland. Have there been any other jurisdictions in Maryland that have set this up?
Not yet. Many counties are working on that. For example, Montgomery County proposed similar bills, and they in their come out there. I think they're going to vote in their delegate committee. So some other like a Tomahawk City, they're going to that as well, and that's what I've been hearing.
Okay, so this would be precedent setting.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Mr. Moriarty, and then Doug Ugazoni.
Yeah, I'm just looking here. Seems that in Tacoma Park, there's some form of ranked choice voting. And according to the website I'm looking at, it looks like Montgomery County and Baltimore City have just introduced enabling legislation. I'm not sure of the status of that. It says that Tacoma Park is the only jurisdiction that uses ranked ballots and has done so since 2006.
Mm-hmm. That's for a local municipal election, though, so it's not in
Yes.
statute, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So it's not in anywhere in existing state statute.
Not that I can see, no.
Right. So this would be precedent setting. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Doug Ugazoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple quick questions. So this is just enabling legislation?
Yes.
Okay, so they would still be up to the county as to whether they would move forward with this?
Yes.
Okay, and then secondly, so this would end up looking like for voters, this would end up looking like on the same ballot, they would have some sort of traditional regular races, and then just for Board of Ed, it would be ranked choice.
Yes.
Okay.
So I just try to explain. Everything will be on the same ballot, right? But for the election, the ballot will be a little different. Then behind the candidate name, you'll show the order of preference, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something, right? And then you click 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 for that candidate.
Sure. No, I get that. It's just, it would be sort of, for lack of a better phrase, and this isn't a really good one, a mixed media ballot. And part of me thinks that will be something that will require a fair amount of education for voters.
Yes, that's the reason we actually asked for election campaign.
Yeah, because I just think, I think we all know that even for elections like ours, where it's a vote for 3 or something like that, often people only vote for 1, sometimes 2. So I just think that the differentiation between, vote for 3 or vote for however many you want down the line, from a ranked perspective, it might be challenging for people just not to do it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Doug Ugazoni. Delegate Terraza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Wu, for bringing this. I'm glad to be on it with you. I think it's a good idea. I think it makes it more likely that those who are elected reflect the voters' choice. Interesting your comment, Doug Ugazoni, that folks don't vote for all 3. So that makes me think we need a campaign on that as well. We need to get some more information out. I don't see it as very different than the fact that some seats are you vote for 1 person, some you vote for 2, some you vote for 3. I don't see that as very different, but I appreciate the point and glad that it's in the bill to do an education campaign on that, because it will be new. And I do think it's a direction that a lot of folks are going in. To Senator Lamb's point, not a lot have done that yet in Maryland, but I think it's an important place and we could be leaders.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Delegate Terraza. I assume, Doug Ugazoni, you had your hand up from before, as is Mr. Moriarty. So Any other Delegate Feldmark? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it would be, this
Delegate
is
Feldmark?
enable. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me? Okay, it would be, this would be enabling legislation. So it would be up to the county to then adopt the specific implementation. And so, you know, in ranked choice voting, there are some models where there are you get to vote for your top X number of choices. And in some models, it is ranked choice voting down the line, as many candidates as there are, you can rank them all. Is that something that would be left to the county to choose as part of their implementation decision?
I think probably it's better to let the county to how to implement that. I don't want to go detail how do they do it. So it's really just enable them to do that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Okay. Seeing none.
Senator
That
Lamb,
wraps. Yeah, go ahead.
before you
Senator
move
Watson.
on and before people hop off, I know we're going to be on the call for about 25 more minutes, but I wanted to briefly ask if everyone could be available at 11:40 before the State of the State for a picture of the delegation. If you cannot be present for that, can you raise your hand or let us know? I know it's a last minute request, but you got to be over there at 11:45, right?
I'm on isolation, so.
Well,
Yeah.
then you won't be there.
Right.
Okay,
it
so we'll
would
do
be
it another
nice.
time. We'll
Thank
do
you.
another time. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion on Howard County 16-23, we'll move on to a bill that we are familiar with. This is Howard County 15-23, archery hunting safety zones. Senator Hesser, any update?
Sure. Excuse me. Well, I think that there's still conversations going on, and actually Senator Gazzoni is thinking things through. So we're waiting for something from him. I did have 3 amendments drafted, which I could briefly present if that was the will of the body to think about. But I think we should probably have all the options on the table before we take any actions. I don't know. I'd sent to Dara and Abby, and I don't know if I tried to upload them into the folder, but I didn't have access to upload. So I don't know if somebody else could pull them up.
Are you asking to pull them up to share them on the screen, or are you?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying. I mean, I can just conceptually, I can just quickly run through them if that's good, Chair, and then we can email them to everybody.
Why don't you conceptually run through them? We'll make sure they're distributed to the delegation.
So, and Dara, you drafted them. So if you want to add anything, please feel free to help. So the first one, basically, hold on. Oh, my computer's frozen. The first one gets at the idea that we're talking about of how the managed hunts that the county runs are, have a higher set of standards. And so the amendment basically says that that the section of the 50 yards would only apply in Howard County for archery hunters who are actively participating in the Howard County Department of Recreation and Parks managed hunt program. And that would be on county-owned land. So it's greatly reducing the amount of land that we're talking about, limiting to on county land and as participants in part of the program. So that's basically the First Amendment. The Second Amendment was basically, and these are kind of like, I think either or, you could do both, I guess, but I had them individually drafted so that the team could decide. The second one was looking at the sharpshooting program, which, and saying that only for the sharpshooting program would we reduce the distance from 150 to 50 yards. And then the last one tries to deal with the issue that we have with the homes being built right up next to the farmland. And this gives the exception for the 50 yards to only those who have a deer management permit. And all of these also, have the archer in the elevated position. So those are the three amendments that I've put together based on the conversations we've had to date. And I just wanted to give Senator Gazzoni a chance to think about it for another week. Does anybody else have amendments they were considering?
Delegate Ziegler and then Delegate Feldmar.
Yes, I asked for one, but haven't gotten it back yet. I would like to have it restricted to managed hunts or people who have crop damage permits, who get the 50 yard, who are able to go up to 50 yards. Seems to me that would satisfy the public's fear about accidents to a large degree, but also protect farmers who do need to try and save their crops. And am I right, Delegate Feldmark, that you have a very similar amendment?
Yes, that I
Delegate
requested,
Feldmark.
but don't have back yet. So that was what I wanted to comment as well. So I'd like to, be able to get that back and just review these together and see what looks like the best path forward.
Mr. Chairman, could I also just mention that there is some confusion about whether or not farmers do already have an exemption. And I wanted to I had asked to check into that as well. We're taking a look at that to see if it's already there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moriarty, followed by Delegate Ross, Delegate Hill.
So just to confirm, first of all, Delegate Ziegler, you're saying that your request is that the smaller safety zone would apply only to somebody either as part of the deer managed hunt or someone who possesses a deer management permit?
A crop damage permit, yes.
And yeah, my understanding is the deer management permit is the permit for resulting from crop damage. So I think we're talking about the same thing.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. And then my second thing is just a procedural request that just to make sure if anyone is requesting an amendment that either go through me or at least I could get CC'd on the request just so I can keep abreast of all the amendment requests out there for delegation bills.
Okay, thank you.
And I do have some research done on the question of farmers exemptions. It's quite wordy, so I think it's best if I provide it to you in an email format rather than discuss it, if that's okay with you.
That's great. We can follow up offline.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Delegate Raza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really quickly, one, I think maybe a dumb question, but is the sharpshooter program both bow hunting and with guns, or that's just with guns? So you're adding something about guns to this one? I guess that's for Senator Hester. I don't know if that's a dumb question or not. I just wasn't sure.
No, there should be an outline in those questions and answers that we sent you from the county that goes through what the managed hunt does versus a sharpshooter. The sharpshooter is only with guns. It is only county employees.
Yeah.
So that would be a different program entirely.
But you're adding that to this bill?
I had this drafted because Senator Gazzoni and Senator Lamb were interested in the sharpshooter program. And so that would, you basically take out this, I mean, you could do any combination. In fact, I thought Delegate Ziegler was suggesting that we do the crop damage permits and the managed deer program as one amendment. But there's 3 different policy choices. And that's what we're deciding on. Those are the ones that I put forward, I guess.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Hill.
Thank you. So Senator, first of all, thank you for working this bill and taking into consideration all of the concerns and recommendations. I'm just gonna go this, and I guess this is for Dara to start with. The current statute 10410 G1 says, except as provided in paragraph 2 and 3, which is what we're addressing, a person other than the owner or occupant while hunting for any wild bird or mammal may not shoot or discharge any firearm or deadly weapon within 150 yards of a dwelling house, residence, church, or other building or camp occupied by human beings, or shoot at any wild bird or mammal while it is within this area without the specific advance permission of the owner or occupant. So I want to make clear, because we've had a lot of discussions in the past, what that paragraph, as I understand it, says is that if it's private land and there is advance permission of the owner or occupant, or the person is the owner or occupant, then 50 yards or anything smaller than 150 yards is allowable for bow hunting, or for that matter for using a firearm. That's what the current statute says. So that a lot of what we're talking about is what we can do on public land or what we can do on private land without getting prior permission. Is that, to start with, am I correct about that, my understanding?
The safety zone restriction, right, does not apply if you are like the owner of said property or you have the permission of the occupant.
Okay, so what Delegate Ziegler and Delegate Feldmark presented as they're trying to address in terms of what a farmer or someone experiencing crop damage can do, presumably if that crop damage is on their own property, they already can be under 150 yards if they're giving themselves their own permission or allowing people to come on. Is that correct?
So I've talked about this with a few people in our department. Our understanding of the deer management permit is that it's more of a temporal adjustment as much as a spatial one. So what the deer management permit does is it allows the holder or an agent of the holder of the permit to hunt deer outside of the deer hunting season. So a deer management permit, which is granted with regards to crop damage, it's valid for 1 year and it authorizes the permittee or an agent of the permittee to hunt deer year round rather than just, as is the case during deer hunting season on Sundays.
Okay.
So the main change of this, the permit relating to crop damage is when hunting is allowed to take place rather than.
But even without that, and again, obviously I'm reading the bill out of the context, outside of the entire statute context, but even without that deer management permit, if it's on a person's own land, they're not obligated to honor the 150 yards as long as there's prior permission to a visitor to that land or it's themselves. I mean, I think the idea there is that if you're on your own land, you know who else is there and if your space is safe. So so the issue about the crop damage piece is an important one, but it doesn't seem to address the other issue about the bill, which is not crop damage, but the number of bills causing traffic accidents on the highways, because we're talking about other parts of the county where crop damage, unless you're talking about just someone's, garden, is really not an issue. So that gets at part of the problem that it may be redundant and unnecessary, but it doesn't address the other part. Is that right, Senator? But your amendments are trying to I mean, you're making that distinction between what people can do on private land or in a more densely populated section like the eastern part of our county, what can be done on public lands that abut private lands. Isn't that primarily what you're trying to get at?
Delegate Hill, there was a lot that you just said. I think we need to check what the law actually does. I don't, my reading of it is that even if it's on private land, you don't have the ability to shoot within 150 feet of another house. I think that would be breaking the state law. So I think, and I can't respond. I mean, you said so much there.
Okay, I'll leave it alone. I'll leave it alone.
Okay.
I think your amendments are good. I'm not, but I think sometimes we're amending it and we're straying away from the point of the bill. And I think when you're narrowing it to the managed hunt program, that's a great idea. When we're talking about what we can do on public land, that's a great idea. But I think Mr. Moore already confirmed that people already have leeway about what they can do on private land.
So I would like to ask Mr. Moriarty to check on that, because I think that what you understood and what you said, I just think we should be absolutely clear on what's allowed on private land. And I'm not sure what was said with that.
Delegate Felmer, do you have a question for me or for Delegate Hill?
Well, it's actually to this point, and I think to offer a little bit of clarification from what I understood, Delegate Hill, in terms of your question, I think one of the key points to realize is when you read that section of the statute and it talks about the permission of the owner or occupant, it's not the permission of the property owner on whose land you are hunting. You need that also, right? If you're hunting on someone's private property, you need to have their permission. But you also need to have permission of the owner or occupant of any home within which you are, encroaching on that radius, right? In terms of that safety zone. So
yes.
So just because you have the farm owner's permission to hunt on their land, that doesn't mean you can go less than 150 yards from the homes that, there may be a subdivision that was built next to a farm, that the back edge of the farm has 20 houses in a row, right? And so to get within 150 yards of any one of those homes, you would need those homeowners' permission.
Great, thank you.
Right.
That's my understanding. Thank you. Yep.
Chris, okay, sorry. If Delegate Hill, that was your question, I apologize because I was a little confused, but yeah, I agree with Delegate Felmer with what you just said there, that each of these homes or other buildings described under the statute have their own radius, and once we go within that zone for each building, the permission requirement applies as it relates to that building.
Okay, Senator Hester.
I would just like to motion that we hold the bill for another week and so that we can get to a session on time. And we can hear from Senator Gazzoni.
Second.
Okay, so we're going to hold that bill. I don't think either the House or the Senate has a floor session at 10, although I know folks may have other appointments going on. So just to be clear, I don't think there's a floor session coming up until 11:45. We have one bill left, and we can spend a few minutes touching on that. That is, let me see here. It is Howard County 7-23. This is the campaign finance bill related to candidates for Village Board of Columbia Council on donations and distributions. Delegate Terraza, anything new to update us on this bill?
So from a new perspective, what I would tell you is that, and I'm happy to speak to the bill again and remind folks where why I brought this, et cetera. But from a new perspective, I had talked about 3 amendments last week. I think there was some concern about the third one The first one was notwithstanding the covenants, et cetera, would go in effect, which is true anyway, but just some safety language. The other one is just a technical correction because it said that the villages would have to either post it or make it available, and it really should be an and. And then the third one, I heard a little bit more concern about. It says a village community association has exclusive authority to determine whether a candidate has properly filed a report of donations and disbursements and may take office under paragraph 1 of this subsection. It sounded like there was some concern, and so I was just going to drop that amendment. I mean, the reality is the villages have the exclusive authority anyway, and it was not my intent to change that relationship. So I was just going to introduce the first two. In terms of independent expenditures, there's been a lot of discussion with the Board of Elections, et cetera. And I think I will be leaving those out for this year. Happy to discuss that with anybody in more detail, but I think this is a start addressing direct contributions. We know there were direct contributions. We don't know how much of the contributions were direct versus independent expenditures. And to be honest, there's not a reason to think any of them were independent expenditures. Independent expenditures are ones that are not coordinated, and there wouldn't have been any reason not to, because you could give an unlimited amount to a candidate anyway. And so you may as well have coordinated. So I think looking at how it works this year, hopefully will give us some more information, and those could be brought up in a future year. So that's really the update. I'm happy to sort of remind you, I mean, Columbia Association is a very different, a very unique entity from other homeowners associations, from other nonprofits. In many ways, it operates like a municipality or corporate city. One of the major ways that you can look at that is that normally, if you think of an HOA and they have a pool or some type of open space, that's only open to their residents. Whereas with CA property, CA runs all sorts of amenities from pathways to lakes, et cetera. And those are open to the general community, not just members of the HOA. So it's very different in that way. It's very different in terms of size, in terms of having a $70 million budget, in terms of how many employees. So I just want to remind everybody how unique CA is in this. So, I mean, that's the update.
Okay.
Happy to take any questions.
Delegate Feldmark, followed by Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this really is not a question for you, Delegate Terrasa, but just for the delegation to know. I had, when we discussed this bill previously, I had mentioned an amendment that I had drafted to address expanding voting rights within village elections as well. I still think that's a critically important issue if we're going to get into legislating village elections. I think one of the most important things we can do is make them more democratic. And I have also requested a separate bill, which will be on the delegation hearing on February 7th. So at this point, I'm not moving forward with that as an amendment to this bill. Since I had raised it previously, I just wanted to clarify for everyone that that's moving forward separately, and I welcome conversation on that as well.
Okay, Delegate Hill.
Yes, thank you. Unless there's an objection, I'd like to move that we just go ahead and vote on this bill.
I have some concerns, and I had a question, but if that's okay. So I was looking back in the bill folder for some prior bills, and it looked like this bill had been introduced as a statewide bill previously in the last session as House Bill 93, I think also by Delegate Terrasa. I was looking in the bill folder for that bill, and there was a letter that was submitted by the Office of the Attorney General by Sandy Brantley's office with concerns about that bill. And much of the language seems like it's mirrored in this bill, which is more of a state, or more of a local version. And just to excerpt from this letter of opposite, can I finish? there was concern from the Office of the Attorney General that the bill, this is the quote, the bill would require candidates for election to many private boards to publicly disclose any contributions or expenditures associated with their respective candidates. Thus, this bill would effectively compel certain speech by private individuals seeking to gain election to private organizations. In order to satisfy the requirements of the First Amendment, the compelled speech regulations would need to further have a compelling government interest via the least restrictive means of doing so. And I'm concerned that based on their interpretation, and much of the language I think mirrors this, that there are significant constitutional concerns, and I'm not sure it's so narrowly tailored so as not to impede on the First Amendment, and that there's significant important government interest in this. And it really is a slippery slope that opens up any private board to have to disclose some of their internal workings when it comes to their board members. Delegate Terraza, I know you wanted to say something. Is there any update on the constitutionality of this from the Attorney General's office?
Yeah, so first of all, I appreciate the question. I definitely want to have a constitution bill. I've been working directly with Sandy Brantley, our attorney, who I think you mentioned there, as well as Jared Demarinis on this issue. And we believe, and I believe, and that's what the letter also says. She wrote 2 letters. I don't know if you have them both, that said that they could pass constitutional muster. There was a separate opinion letter written by, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting Hannibal's last name in the Attorney General's office, which I discussed with him afterwards. And he said,
Hannibal Kimmerer.
yes, right. And so, which we discussed, and he said that it would probably pass constitutional muster if we only had CA in it. So this is a separate bill. I've since discussed this directly with Anthony Brown, the new Attorney General, and he's assured me that their opinions on this will be consistent. And I've been working with Sandy Brantley. Whether you need another letter for that to feel more comfortable, that's up to you, and I can talk with her. But I mean, I was on the
Okay,
phone.
I would like to hold this bill until I can check on the constitutionality of it.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, have you made that letter available to all of us? If not, would you mind doing so?
I can circulate the letter of opposition to last year's statewide bill. It's in the public bill folder on the website.
Okay.
But yes, we
All
can
right, it is.
circulate that
Okay.
to the delegation.
Okay, can I just say really quickly though, we had 2 opinions from the official opinions from the Attorney General's office before that, both before the bill was drafted and after the bill was drafted, saying that it could and would pass constitutional muster. Since then, we've worked directly together to make sure that was even more likely. And that other letter was inconsistent with that. And that's what I discussed with the Attorney General. And I can talk to him directly about that if you'd like. But I'm happy to send you all 3 of those letters, but we have 2 that say it would pass constitutional muster and 1 that was oddly inconsistent. And when I called them, they said it would be fine if it were just for CA. So I know that you need to see that probably in writing, but I'm happy to send you all 3 opinions. And I'm also happy to have that addressed again by them. But as I've said, I've discussed this directly with Anthony Brown.
Okay, Delegate Atterbury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on what Delegate Terraza said, because her bill did come to Ways and Means. And she brought the issue about constitutionality to me, and the committee looked into it, and it was resolved that if it was brought at the local level, that it would not have any constitutionality issues. So I'll just say for the record, I'm comfortable with the legislation, but I'm sure Delegate Terraza will get something for everyone to feel more comfortable and take a look at. And on a second note, I just would like to share and remind everyone that the House bill drop deadline is next Friday, and I would not like to be in the position of trying to get 10 bills out of rules. So we probably have a big meeting ahead of us next Wednesday. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So I'm happy to reach out to our Attorney General's office as well to try to get some clarification from this. I think it's important to get right, and I want to make sure that if we are passing legislation, that it is constitutional as well.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Delegate Watson.
in terms of the bills still left to vote on, I think, or to, to dispose of one way or another, do we have 4? I'm trying to make sure that we know what we have to tackle next week, as Delegate Atterbury mentions. We've got the hunting bill, we've got the CA bill, we've got choice voting, and we have the Board of Ed public financing bill. Is there anything else that we are missing? Just
2 CA bills,
oh,
the bill I just discussed.
sorry. So 2 CA bills. So I guess what I would suggest, since we know we're going to be tight on time, we're starting at 8:30 next week, is that the sponsors of the bills do some work with their fellow delegates ahead of time to answer questions so that we can be as efficient as possible. And remember, we have a public hearing on the 7th. We have our meeting on the 8th. The bill drop deadline is the 9th. And so we're going to try to get as much done as we possibly can. Senator Lamb.
I agree. So those are all good points. So I think given the tight time frame, we just want to make sure members, do their outreach and homework as early as possible. All right. Seeing no further questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Adjourn?
All right. Seeing no objections, thank you. We are adjourned. We'll see you next week.